They called it a strategic future dinner. But anyone who's survived long enough in the corporate world knows a firing when they smell it, especially when it's served on a yacht with caviar and curated wine pairings. This story is for anyone who's ever been erased from the table they helped build, only to return holding the final move. Stay with me. I stood on the edge of the deck, Manhattan's skyline, glittering like a smokescreen behind me, and waited. A soft jazz quartet played inside. Waiters glided by with trays of oysters and compliments. And somewhere near the captain's table, Reed Callahan, our newly minted CEO, was smiling too wide. I wasn't supposed to be here tonight. The original invite was accidentally left off my calendar. It wasn't until my assistant noticed the guest list floating around Slack that I knew. And once I did, I made sure to show up on time in black satin with nothing to lose. I'd spent 17 years building the digital backbone of Stratus Metrics from scratch. When the company was bleeding from a securities breach, I held the line. When competitors tried to poach our contracts, I rewrote the infrastructure that kept us secure. I'd done it all quietly, without fanfare, without asking for a corner office. So when Reed raised his glass and introduced the company's next era, I already knew where it was going, but even I wasn't prepared for the twist. Everyone, he said, placing a hand on the shoulder of the young woman beside him. Meet Sienna Callahan, our new chief strategy architect, Sienna, his niece, fresh out of a Silicon Valley leadership boot camp. In a white power suit, not a single hair out of place, glowing like an ad campaign. She clinked her glass against his. Time for some fresh air around here. And then the line that told me everything. Ilara's been an incredible foundation, but now we build upward. I nodded politely, smiled, let them toast, let them laugh. Because what they didn't know, what they never once stopped to consider, was that the entire security framework they were toasting on still had my name etched into its bones. I came into the office early the next morning, earlier than usual. The place was still half asleep. Just the cleaning crew finishing up, and the lights humming their low mechanical tune. No announcement had been made yet. No farewell memo, just the faint shift in how people avoided my eyes. I said nothing. I walked the floor like always, coffee in hand, pausing at my glass-walled office, only to see that the nameplate was gone. The gesture was quiet. Efficient. Corporate, I stepped inside anyway, logged in. My credentials still worked for now. I didn't flinch. I knew better than to ask questions in rooms where the answers had already been decided. Instead, I opened the admin console, pulled access logs, and backed up every version of the security framework I'd written since 2011. I archived system protocols, downloaded internal correspondence, pulled contracts, then moved to the legacy server and did what I knew they'd forget to do. I revoked every hidden superuser credential I'd ever created. And then I left behind a gift. Not a virus. Nothing illegal, just proof, documentation of ownership, timestamped immutable, buried in a private developer node labeled simply Ilara V1, Zero Foundation. On my way out, I walked past the big monitor in the lobby, where client logos rotated proudly. For a moment, I watched them flash by firms we'd secured through trust. Late nights, clean execution, names that meant something once, and then I stepped outside. The cold hit harder than I expected, even for October. I paused for a second. One breath, then kept walking. I didn't slam the door, didn't post a bitter farewell on LinkedIn. I didn't need to. Let them think I was done. Let them assume I walked out empty-handed. But the truth, I was walking away with more than they ever imagined. Not just the blueprints, not just the code, not even the 5% stake. I still quietly held. I was walking away with clarity and something they'd lost long ago. Leverage. It took 4 days. Just 4 days before the cracks began to show. Not dramatic ones, not headlines, but hairline fractures, the kind that spread slowly until the whole structure buckles under its own weight. The first came from Tokyo. An encrypted message from one of our oldest partners flagged an authentication failure in the client dashboard. Minor on the surface, But I knew that dashboard like the back of my hand, and it didn't break on its own. It broke when someone tinkered with back-end security tokens they didn't fully understand. By Friday afternoon, another email pinged, then another pattern system, latency vendor, integration failures, legacy encryption, rollback errors. None of it dangerous yet, but all of it familiar. I had spent the last decade holding that system together with discipline, not duct tape. Each tool was connected to a rule, each rule a reason. And now, with fresh vision at the helm, they were rearranging code like it was a Pinterest board. Sienna, in all her curated confidence, had hosted her first agile innovation sprint. Translation: 30 underpaid developers racing against artificial deadlines to impress a woman who had never built a single scalable system in her life. I watched from a distance. Literally from my home monitor, I could still observe portions of the public-facing code they deployed, and I saw it coming before they did. One of the modules, an open-source predictive plugin Sienna insisted they push, was flagged by 2 external partners for compliance concerns. Data misclassification, non-conformity with GDPR. They hadn't even tested it in Sandbox, but they still hadn't called me. Not yet. They thought it was fixable, thought the interns she brought in could Google their way through the mess. Let them try. Because problems like this don't start with crashes. They start with confidence, and nothing makes a system unravel faster than confidence in the wrong hands. So I waited. I went on with my days, cooked dinner, watered my plants, took long walks while news trickled through the wires. And the whole time I kept a single thought at the center of my mind. They don't even know yet where the real break is. The first emergency meeting was on a Tuesday, called hastily poorly attended. Sienna stood at the head of the table with a glossy slide deck titled Forward Reboot System Realignment. Half the room nodded, unsure of what they were agreeing to. The root issue, she blamed it on legacy friction. Translation: blame the architecture, not the architect. They hired outside consultants, flown in from Boston with buzzwords and frameworks that looked good on paper but collapsed under the actual infrastructure. Within days, new bugs appeared. Client access slowed. Some dashboards began returning null data. Meanwhile, no one mentioned my name. Not directly, but in the eyes of 2 senior managers, I saw the brief flicker of, maybe we made a mistake. I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table one night, staring at a ceramic mug from our launch year 2012 faded letters chipped edge. I remembered working till midnight for that first federal audit rewriting encryption layers while everyone else slept. My name had never been on the front page, but it was in every line of code they now tried to erase. And now they were scrambling. A patch here, a new hire there, a whole new data. Governance team formed in a week, but none of it worked, because you can't replace understanding with urgency. And that's all they had now. Panic dressed up in productivity metrics. On Thursday, a private client escalated a concern. One of the automated reports had misfired, sending classified trend data to the wrong recipient. The compliance team flagged it. Legal got involved. Still no one called me, but I knew the whispers had started. I could feel it, like pressure building inside a wall. Everyone pretending the paint wasn't cracking, while water seeped through the foundation. And behind all the noise, one truth stayed solid. You can't restructure what you don't understand. The first call came from HR. Polite, clipped with just enough concern to sound performative. We'd love to discuss a short-term advisory role, Alara, just to help stabilize things. You know, legacy knowledge and all that. I let her talk. The second call came from Reed himself. I let that one in, go to voicemail. Then came the email, subject line support during transition. Your insights matter. There it was. Not regret, not apology, just fear, lightly veiled in flattery. I didn't respond. I forwarded the email to a private folder labeled, When They Flinch that week. Sienna held another meeting, another presentation, another round of promises. But this time, the room wasn't nodding. This time, questions followed her slides, quiet ones at first, then more pointed. One manager asked if the recent compliance breach was an isolated event. Another inquired why back-end monitoring reports hadn't been sent out in over a week. Sienna brushed it off. but I knew the tone, knew the tightening jaw, the invisible line between certainty and unraveling. That weekend, I was in Chicago, meeting with the director of infrastructure at a major cloud services provider. We were collaborating on a pilot program I'd quietly joined just weeks after my departure. They didn't just want my input. They wanted me. By the time I got back home, another message waited. This time from Sienna, short casual. But I could hear the tension between the lines. Hope you're well, just wondering if you'd be open to grabbing coffee. I'd love to hear your perspective on the system handoff. I stared at it, then typed 4 words. I'm with a client and hit send. I wasn't being cruel. Just honest. They'd treated me like a relic until their shiny new version cracked. Now they were looking back, but I wasn't standing where they left me. Have you ever walked away quietly, only to have the very people who erased you come searching again? And when they did, were you already too far ahead to care? I didn't need to block their calls. I didn't need revenge. I just needed to keep building. And that's what I was doing on a newer system, with better partners and zero illusions. Because the most powerful comeback doesn't happen on stage. It happens when you've already moved on. I didn't announce anything, didn't update my LinkedIn. I didn't even tell the old team what I was working on. But the news found them anyway. Technova Strategic Systems had just signed a multi-million-dollar integration deal with 3 of Stratus's biggest legacy clients, quiet, clean, and painfully efficient. My name didn't appear in the headlines, but I didn't need it to. The real move came on a Tuesday. Stratus had called a quarterly strategy summit. They always held them in the 17th floor glass conference room with skyline views and espresso bars tucked into the corners like scenery for a staged power play. I hadn't been in that room for 6 months. Until I walked in this time as Technova's systems advisor. I wasn't alone. I was flanked by one of Technova's executive directors and the head of enterprise implementation. We were there for transition insights as part of a proposed vendor audit. Stratus had invited Technova without realizing I would be the one leading the session. Sienna was already in the room. She stood by the whiteboard. Sharpie in hand, mid-pitch. A vision plan. Color-coded, buzzword-loaded. Her voice faltered just slightly when she saw me. Elora Reed said from the head of the table, rising. Didn't realize you were consulting with Technova. I've been consulting with a lot of people, I said calmly. This one just happens to be relevant. Silence rippled. Nobody knew where to look. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't grandstand. I simply opened my folder and began outlining the compliance failures, integration flaws, and procedural oversights. I'd observed now as a neutral third party, Sienna kept quiet. So did Reed. Their power wasn't gone, but its shape had changed. It no longer came from confidence. It came from fear. Fear of what else I knew. After the session, Reed approached me near the elevators. You're doing this to make a point. No, I said, pressing the button. I'm doing this to make it work. I wasn't back. I was above. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I'd outgrown the battlefield. It started with a resignation. Vanessa, head of operations, turned in her notice on a Monday morning, clean professional 2 weeks. No drama. But anyone paying attention knew what it meant. She'd been with Stratus for nearly 10 years, handled crisis logistics, managed vendor transitions. She was the glue, quiet, unshakable. Her leaving wasn't just a loss. It was a message. Within 3 days, 2 more followed Luis. From back-end architecture, left for a cybersecurity firm in Austin. Then came Helena, client services lead, who moved to a competitor without even finishing out her notice. HR called it market churn. But inside the boardroom, the truth sounded different. People weren't jumping ship. They were evacuating. Still no one said my name. But I saw the board minutes. I saw the shift in tone, phrases like structural instability and talent retention, risk showing up where terms like vision and innovation used to sit. Sienna doubled down. She hosted a webinar for remaining staff, titled The Path Forward, talked about resilience growth. New horizons, smiled too hard, blinked too much. Meanwhile, client service tickets tripled in volume. The back-end team, now cobbled together from contract workers and college hires, couldn't stabilize core functions. Predictive models failed. Clients grew frustrated. In private forums, familiar names began warning each other about growing concerns at Stratus. I didn't respond, didn't post, but I watched from my quiet desk at home, where I now consulted for 3 firms, including Technova. I ran diagnostics on integrations, reviewed system proposals, advised on expansion roadmaps. No late nights, no coffee-fueled damage control, just structure, clarity, and the satisfaction of building systems that didn't implode. Then late on a Thursday, I got a call from Vanessa. "They're asking questions," she said. "Who the board? They've noticed Sienna's metrics aren't matching up. And Reed, he's absent. Not officially, but he's stopped showing up to internal stand-ups. And there's a rumor they're prepping for a quiet leadership reset." I didn't say anything. "You think they'll reach out?" she asked. I glanced at the unread message in my inbox, marked urgent from Stratus's interim board chair. They already have, because the storm hadn't broken me. It had cleared the sky around me. It wasn't a whistleblower. It was a leak. An anonymous file sent to the press, copied to half the board, and buried in the metadata screenshots from a 2021 leadership retreat presentation labeled Talent Optimization. On slide 9, a bullet point read, "Eliminate legacy roles, EC resistance to culture shift." The initials weren't subtle, neither was the intent. For months, the narrative had been natural transition. They called my departure a new chapter. But now it was clear it had been premeditated, a strategic removal. Not because I'd failed, but because I wasn't glossy enough for their rebrand. The story spread fast first through internal Slack threads, then the industry blogosphere. One headline read, "Stratus under fire, founder-level contributor. Silently removed during restructure." I didn't comment. I didn't need to, because right behind that leak came a copy of an internal NDA signed by Reed and Sienna in the early phases of the leadership shift, outlining their intent to accelerate generational optics by replacing key senior roles with youth-forward representation. Translation: I was erased for being too seasoned, too stable, too much a reminder of what came before. But they forgot one detail. I had receipts, a legal folder time-stamped and quietly notarized that included my contributions to the company's proprietary security framework dating back to the early days of launch. I'd held off filing patents. Out of loyalty, out of trust. That trust was gone. My attorney filed the IP ownership notices that same week. Quietly, strategically. The documentation was clean. Elora Carter, listed as original creator and systems architect for 3 key data protection layers still used in Stratus's infrastructure. Within 72 hours, their legal team requested a private conversation. I declined. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was deliberate. Let the news circulate. Let clients ask hard questions. Let partners wonder what else had been buried under rebranding initiatives, and let Reed and Sienna sit with it. Not because I wanted to humiliate them, but because they needed to remember some foundations aren't meant to be painted over, they're meant to be understood and respected. The board called a closed session. No press. No recording. Just 15 people in a room with a company unraveling at its edges. I wasn't invited, not officially. But halfway through the meeting, as arguments built around Sienna's leadership, one of the directors pulled out a thick folder. Inside copies of the intellectual property filings diagrams, source code lineage, all tied back to one name. Mine. The room went quiet. "What are we using that we don't own one?" director asked. "Technically, we still have operating rights," someone muttered. "But not protections," the board chair clarified. "Not if the creator decides to revoke them." That was the shift. Not rage, not scandal. Uncertainty. The kind that makes investors hesitate, that makes acquisition partners revise their terms. Technova's interest in a merger hadn't disappeared, but they'd started asking pointed questions. Not just about financials, but about stability. Who actually understood the systems? Who built them? Who could be trusted to steward them during a transition? And then came the formal proposal. Not from Stratus. From Technova. A structured merger offer contingent on the establishment of a neutral transitional advisory panel to oversee integration. The condition I would chair it, not as an employee, not as a returning executive, as an autonomous consultant backed by Technova's acquisition terms and legal framework. I didn't blink, I accepted. My first act wasn't dramatic. I didn't fire anyone, didn't clean house. I simply redrew the map. Split functions by competency, not politics. Reinstated system documentation protocols. Froze all front-end changes until back-end compliance was complete. Sent a memo to every department head. Effective immediately. All system modifications require my review. Not for control, for coherence. There were no applause, no headlines. But in the silence that followed, I felt the shift. Reed stepped down within the week, citing strategic exhaustion. Sienna was reassigned to an innovation sandbox, safe far from anything critical. And me, I didn't move into a corner office. I didn't want it. My seat was at the center, not of status, but of structure. I wasn't rebuilding the company. I was rebalancing it. Quietly, precisely. Without bitterness, because power isn't just about titles. It's about knowing what holds the walls up and being the only one who still remembers how they were built. I didn't move back into my old office. Someone asked me about it once. An intern maybe 2 weeks in. He said he thought I'd want the window view again. The corner desk, my nameplate. I just smiled. Some offices are for building things. Others are for remembering what you built. Instead, I worked from the strategy room. No title on the door, just whiteboards, fiber optics, and a lock. Only I had the code for. We didn't rebuild Stratus to what it had been. We rebuilt it into what it should have been. Functional, adaptable, and egoless. There was no press release, no ceremony. But the board quietly extended my contract for another year. Then another. Vanessa returned full-time as COO. Luis rejoined on the systems side under a hybrid CTO model. We didn't talk about loyalty. We talked about systems that respect the people who hold them up. In the spring, Phoenix Capital finalized the acquisition. Not a hostile takeover, but a steady handoff. The transition team included 3 of my former analysts, a new security director I'd personally mentored, and 1 junior staffer from the operations department who had once stayed late to fix a reporting error. No one else even noticed I invited her to join the audit team. She cried in the hallway. Said no one had ever noticed her work before. I just nodded. You did it right. That's all that counts. That summer I stepped back. Officially, I didn't vanish. I became what I had always been. At my best, the steady voice behind the systems, not the face in the photo. My laptop still hums quietly. Each morning on the kitchen counter, right next to the same chipped mug from our first year. I log in, check the logs, skim the tickets. Not because I have to, because I care. Sometimes I watch the dashboards run smooth and silent and think, this is the reward, not the money. Not the recognition, the continuity, the fact that the thing I built still runs even without my name at the top of the org chart. A few weeks ago, I got an email from Celeste Ramos, subject line, Legacy. Yours, she wrote. You didn't just fix the system, you redefined what leadership looks like when no one's clapping. Thank you for reminding us that power doesn't need noise, it needs clarity. I didn't reply, but I saved it. Some legacies aren't loud, they're coded in silence. Have you ever been the one quietly keeping everything running until the moment you weren't there, and suddenly everything felt the gap? Tell me your story, I'm listening.